Yeah.
Awesome.
So, Matty, we've obviously known each other for a while now and put a lot of deals together. And one of the reasons I wanted to have a chat to you today is the last deal we put together last week, when you gave me a call to tell me everything has been paid and deposits and I said, thanks, Matty. And you said, oh, mate, thank you. You just make it easy. And it wasn't until later I was thinking about it. I was thinking, what do some agents do that make things hard?
Yeah. It's a good question. Obviously, in my role as a buyer's agent, finding property and negotiating deals. Obviously, get to deal. Really fortunate. I get to deal with a lot of agents, and predominantly on the Gold Coast, we're really lucky. We've got so many good agents here. But every deal I do, whether whatever agent it is all over the Gold Coast, I always sit back and sort of reflect on each sort of deal. And I'm noticing more and more that the agent actually does play a big role in the buying transaction. Obviously, I work for the buyer, an agent works for the seller, but I find the best deals and generally the best results for not only my client but also the agent's clients are generally when it's a mutual working together rather than against each other. We all know we're working for each other's client hard, but it's like you said, Andy. There's a big difference I'm finding in sort of dealing with certain agents in terms of the process and things like that. So, which results obviously in better outcomes for our clients.
What are some of the smaller things, or perhaps the behaviours or the little processes that an agent might do that makes your part easier?
Yep, probably the first thing I noticed that, from my point of view as a buyer's agent, that I noticed in the best agents is communications. Probably the first one. It sounds so simple, like communicate, like that's what most agents do, right? But I think it's because there's so many moving parts of the process from start to finish. It's an idea of where it's up to, because you guys know and I know that when I bring a client on, for instance, like there's a full journey ahead of us right now in terms of inspecting property. When we like a property, we've got to do our due diligence and reporting, and then we're going to negotiate. So there's a heap of different moving parts. I find the best agents are good communicators on whereabouts in the process it's up to, and
Does that
just
mean
keeping us informed.
So does that mean they're calling you, or when you call them, they communicate, they can articulate clearly, or is it that they're more proactive and they're actually calling you saying, this is where we're at, just wanted to let you know?
Exactly. So one thing I take pride in is I like to stay proactive, keep the agent informed, and then I always find the good agents are the same back to me. They'll keep me informed as well. So yeah, you're right, proactive. When I've got a query or a question, it gets answered. So it sounds pretty simple, but I'm noticing differences in obviously sales agents or across. I mean, I hear it even from buyers agents in Melbourne and Sydney. I've got mates down there. Same thing. Like there's always different levels, like with any industry, I guess.
Do you think that when agents can't answer questions quickly or fluently, it's because they're agents that take business on everywhere and everywhere, as opposed to like, us at McGrath, we sort of specialise in areas. Do you find that helps?
Yeah, for sure. So this is another key thing I guess I notice is, agents generally in the sales process, they'll have like little farm areas kind of thing. So not all there's some great agents on the coast as well that cover, we've done some deals with agents who just do sort of high end stuff, and there's other agents who just do units and acreage and different things like that. So I'm finding the agents who are proactive in knowledge and knowing their response all have that little niche, whether it's an area, whether it's a dwelling type, whether it's a price point. I find it's one of those three, and when an agent just focuses on those, they're always the best in they know the answer, and it seems like they get the most listings as well. Generally, they're on. We got our little hot list when we bring a new client on. I know the agents if a client's looking in a certain suburb, or we got a client who's looking at a certain price point or a dwelling type. I already got the 10 who I'm going to call first. I call pretty much all of them on the coast, but there's probably 10 I'm making that first call to, because they'll probably have it somewhere in their stock, or they've spoken to the owner at some point.
Even if it's not their listing, they'll probably have some knowledge about it if they're pretty proactive in the area.
Oh, yeah. And that's a big tip to buyers I always give as well. Like, identify who that niche agent is for the property you're looking for. I think this is a really good tip. It's, I think, dwelling type, price point, location. Pick one of those three, you know, and segment it to what you're looking for. So, for instance, if we've got a client looking for a 2 mil beachfront unit, so to speak, all right, I'm going to focus on who sells the most beachfront units at 1.5 plus. And I already know a top 10. I'm going to hit them first. They've probably spoken to most of the vendors I want the property for, whether it's on market, off. And that's the reason we do a lot of off markets, because, I spoke to Sally or the vendor the other day that they would sell at the right price. Do you know what I mean? I think that's a huge tip for buyers, yeah.
You've had that quite often. I've heard you say where people will call you up about buying a place in Palm Beach.
Yeah.
It's not actually your listing. They'll say, I'm negotiating or I'm about to buy this one. What are your thoughts?
Yeah.
You know? So I think like some buyers actually recognise that already, that whoever that agent is, there's value in talking to them, even if it's not their listing. Does that make sense?
For sure.
Which is what you're doing anyway. So even if, hypothetically, if there was an out-of-area agent that had a property that was right for your client, you'd probably still give the lead agent for that niche a call to say, what are your thoughts on that? You know, because we're looking at doing a deal on it.
For sure.
To get their insight.
For sure. And that's the thing, like knowledge is always power, and you got to lean on, especially like as buyers, we do this for a living, so we're well informed with the market, but a lot of buyers out there might not be informed with the market, especially obviously there's a lot of interstate people looking on the Gold Coast. They've got no idea on price points. So it's a good idea to make connections with those agents in those niches, as you mentioned, because they offer some really good resources and value.
Yeah. I've noticed since you've been doing this, and what are you doing, 12 months now, from the get-go, you've been super proactive. And I deal with 18 to 20 different buyers agents, and you're coming through my open homes. You're ringing me regularly. You always seem to got a client. You come to the photo shoots. You've really stepped up, I think, the industry. You getting that from anywhere? You sort of, obviously you do a lot of research, but where are you getting that sort of intel? And even your dialogue at auctions, I hear you sometimes like, oh, that was good.
Well, it's a funny one. Same thing, like obviously I've had some experience as a sales agent. So I guess the first thing is understanding your shoes, where you guys are at. I think that's the first thing. And I've actually, I guess, adapted a lot of the models from you. I've got a niche as well. I specifically do a certain pocket of the Gold Coast, and transitioning in a certain price point now, and be bringing on more buyers agents to focus on a certain price point. So we're going to become experts. I'm just doing the same thing, but I'm working for the buyer, same as you. So, and same thing, I'll just reach out to best buyers agents in Sydney and Melbourne and Brisbane, and what are they doing? So, not success leaves clues, and you guys are the same. You're all about growth and learning off people who are ahead of you. So, I guess that's a big thing. We're lucky on the Gold Coast. There's a lot of good operators and buyers agents and agents on the Gold Coast. So, it's good to see. It's definitely on the rise. We're always behind here on the Gold Coast. I feel behind Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, those sort of big capital cities. But I think with the migration, the way it's coming along, I think we're going to become a really big city. Like it's really exciting.
Yeah, obviously with COVID, that's probably helped you guys out a fair bit because they can't come up and down as much. How much extra activity have you been seeing, or growth on growth of it? Like your business is obviously getting bigger and bigger. You've put an extra couple of people on there. Is it growing faster than you expected, or was it a plan that you had in place?
Yeah, look, definitely faster than expected for sure. In saying that, I could see the potential as well. Obviously, there was a bit of a gap in the market, obviously, with how many agents there are versus buyers agents, and how many people are migrating to the city. It's just a huge supply and demand imbalance. So, I sniffed opportunity and took it. But I guess the big thing off the back of that is obviously COVID, us having a lifestyle location as well, interest rates all-time low, so people got bigger deposits now because they're not going to the movies or restaurants as much as what they were. I mean, Sydney and Melbourne, they're not going anywhere, so they're
overseas.
Yeah, overseas travel, exactly right. So it's this whole influx of all these factors that people, and obviously sentiment as well, like the news. I've seen dozens of articles of why property's a great buy, and you know what people are like once they read and hear something that the media says, even whether it's true or not, they'll jump on the back of it. So it's just been a combination of a lot of things. But I think it's the industry itself, I think, is on the rise, which is great, because I think it's only been a matter of time, because in bigger cities like New York and in the States and in Europe as well, it's been common. Like I've spoken to a few US clients, and they're just dumbfounded why there isn't professional help for both sides. So I think it's good. I think it's good for the industry.
Yeah, so it's just an education thing that is growing. A bit like the auction campaigns on the Gold Coast now. It's going back 12 months ago, it was not so well received, and now people love them. It's I think buyers are actually enjoying it more because it's more transparent, and that's making our life a little bit easier too.
What do you notice around auctions? So, as an agent who does quite a few auctions and an auctioneer, I've noticed that every buyer's preference is to buy before the auction, and I think as a seller's nervous about selling at auction, so is a buyer about buying at auction. And whenever I've dug deeper, I've asked, well, why is that? And they always say, well, don't want to get in a bidding war and pay overs, And sometimes I think to myself, well, just figure out what your number is, and But it's almost like buyers don't trust themselves to stop at a number. So as a buyer's agent, when you come in, I suppose, how does that work for you? Because you don't really have the emotion that they might be carrying at an auction. So do they feel more confident to go to auction with you representing them, knowing that they might not get as emotional, or are they still wanting to try and buy before the day?
Yeah, good question. It's funny, it's top of mind, because we had some auction clients, because we do an auction bidding service as well, and we had a few sign up with us, so got a few auctions lined up for some clients. And the biggest tip I always give to buyers, so even if people were going to auction and didn't want to use our service, my biggest tip is know what the property's worth to a degree, and then work backwards from that. I think too many people go in blind to an auction, have no idea, emotion takes over, and then they get the feels, and then they got the auctioneer and the agent, asking for more, and they're just like, if you have an idea what it's worth, at least you can sort of work backwards from that. So
what does that mean? So what does work backwards from that mean?
Well, as I said, my biggest tip is find out what the property's worth, quantify value on the property. Step number one, hands down. Get an idea, some comp sales, beds, bath, land, all that, to get an idea of what it is worth in the market. Obviously, no one knows what it is worth, really. The market will decide that. But you got to know from a valuation point of view what it is worth, and then have some sort of strategy to that price. Is that where it ends up when your quantified value? Is that above your expectation, what you would pay for the property? It might be well below. And then you're like, okay, I might give myself a bit of buffer to play with at the auction. And then from that, the next step is really, okay, what's my strategy now to try and get near that or below that, or try and just win the property? Like there's, as you guys know, that come auction day, probably the biggest thing I see is no one's got a strategy in place or anything. It's just literally, yeah. So I see it time and time again. Like you can see the ones who have had a think before they come to the auction. They've had a thought around where their walkaways, and they're just like, yep, we're done. Not a mo,
Again, with agents, do you find that some auctions run better than others? Like personally, I try and educate my buyers as well by basically having that same talk to them. So the biggest mistake I see is when people haven't had a chat about the worst case scenario. They all think about the best case scenario, but think about the worst case scenario. If you have to pay that extra $10,000, $15,000 in competition, you've got to have that. You've got to have thought about that before the day. Otherwise, you make an emotional decision on either not paying enough and going, oh, geez, I wish I'd paid more, or the opposite and going, oh, Jesus, I paid too much, and feeling the buyer's remorse.
Yep, you're exactly right. And a big one on that as well is the preparation. I guess the good agents out there, again, an observation is the good agents out there are preparing their buyers, because obviously the agent obviously wants the best price for the seller. So they're preparing all the buyers for battle, basically. you know, and why wouldn't you, you know? So I know that as a buyer's agent, so I do my own, I'm prepping my team here, but most people out there are just like going in blind. So I do notice the best agents are prepping them all in a way to make sure they're going in confidently come auction day, because even as a professional, I've done plenty and we've won plenty. I still get nervous always. Like it's nerve wracking, but could imagine someone who's never bought in like 20, 30 years, they'd be frightened. So, but again, if you're confident and you've got a strategy in place, and again, you know the worst case scenario, or you know your complete walk away, that if you missed it for a few grand, you wouldn't be crying that night kind of thing, then you work backwards from that. Because I've also seen some, when you're prepared and you're confident, you know what your limits are, and you just go out there and you're there to buy it, right? Like sometimes you can get it probably below what you thought you could get it for as well. So just have a crack. That's probably my biggest frustration is like so many people registered, no one wants to have a crack. Like sometimes it's like you're there to buy the property. So, you know, buy with confidence. That's my observation, yeah.
They're barbecue bitters, that's what Andy calls them.
Yeah.
What about, this is a little, maybe a bit more of a controversial topic in Queensland only, but what about the conversation of price on or before auction? So what do you notice there? Because, you know, from what I see and hear is that there's obviously we're not allowed to discuss price, okay, or vendors' expectations. A bit of a grey area about, we can give recent sales, we can share recent sales. So the way I look at it is I like to educate the buyers and say, well, recent sales that we feel are comparable range from here to here and so on. How do you feel about that? And what else, what other kind of strategies are there about guiding? Because I know there's also another strategy which is no price, no sales, no nothing. What do you think it's worth? You know, which I've never been a big fan of. But what are your thoughts on that? And what do you think works better for you, your clients, the agent, the sellers?
Yep, good question. Here's a little tip for agents, I think. Have that question already in your head, what you know you're going to say. I noticed the best agents already got the dialogue ready to go, because everyone asks it.
Yeah.
Everyone. Like I go to every auction, you hear in the open. And it's funny, I know which agents have already prepped their dialogue. It comes smooth off the tongue, bang. The agents, unfortunately, you know what I mean? That's probably a big tip for agents on my perspective, is have your dialogue slick and ready, because you'll get hammered. You all know you're going to get hammered with that question. So the best agents have a really good dialogue back at that. So that's one thing I noticed. I think in there, again, it's always a hard one, because I understand that obviously as a professional, like we do our own research on it, but have a look at the comparables is a good one, because a question I always like to ask as well, what comparables are the other buyers seeing? So you can start sort of, you can sort of understand what my competition is looking at. So some people, obviously there'll be a range. There'll be at the lower end, the mid, all those sort of things. But at least I've got an idea of what that buyer, and that buyer are looking at and what they're comparing with, because I might identify a few things. Well, that one, I know that's not worth that, because, I know, what's behind it, or, the infrastructure going on, or I know that aspect's different. That needs a lot of work, So I think that's one way is sort of understand what the comparables are. And as you're right, a lot of the good agents will have those prepared, or some sort of dialogue prepared. So,
can you think? I think you're probably putting it back down to knowing your area really well. Like you work on a niche area on the Gold Coast. We have our niche areas as agents, so we know everything about the properties and why one sold for X, Y, Z, and why the others. And I think that's important for a vendor when they choose an agent to know that, and not just be guesstimating a price, and as well for the buyers to approach you, because you know the properties in the area that you're servicing. You're not trying to sell a property in Brisbane that you really have no idea about the marketplace, wouldn't even know where the schools were, let alone what the value is. I think that's really important.
Yeah, and exactly, it comes back to that, having all of that prepared and ready, kind of. And as you said, if you're that niche sort of specialty agent, whatever the dwelling, location, price point, you don't, you're prepared already, because you know it like the back of your hand. So But yeah, that's something I have identified is sometimes you can tell which agents have been in preparation for the auction campaign.
There's the odd scenario where a seller specifically requests that comparable sales aren't shared with buyers, or that they don't want to influence the market in any way. Have you come across any sharp dialogue where, because that's a tricky question when the seller asks you not to influence price. So, and some agents go down that path with auctions by default. So, is there any good sharp dialogue for when the seller says, "I don't want you to discuss sales or influence price in any way"? What have you found is a good response to that as an agent?
Yep. So one thing I've identified, and this is probably just because of my experience as an agent, understanding how to track competition and different things like that. But I noticed the agents, if that's not using comparables, is to get a comparable or use some sort of dialogue on a past sale. That's an attractive price point that's going to attract people to come to the open home. And, you're not saying it's worth that. It's just, or you could even go like type in recent sales into realestate.com and you'll see a few 4-bed, 2 baths, recent sales. I'd compare them off that. If that's in your price point, come along to the open home. Something along those lines to just get them through. That's something I've noticed I've been put on that sort of perspective as well. So
basically, that when the vendor hasn't given the agent permission to discuss sales, the agent suggests you do your own due diligence around sales, and you can find them on real estate. And it's not actually hard. Like if you're a buyer, or I reckon perhaps maybe an exercise you might do is, if I was the vendor, which sales would I be choosing that I consider comparable to mine? As a vendor, they're always going to choose the best ones, and then the buyers are going to choose the lowest ones. And there's your range, really. You can put yourself in the shoes of the vendor, put yourself in the shoes of the buyer, and if you're in that range, know your limit, justify your quantity and your value, and turn up and have a bid.
Exactly right. Yeah. That's it. At the end of the day, you got to be like, most cases, it's $1-2 million asset. Buying a property is not a cheap thing. We take more time on the clothes we're going to wear to the gym that morning than you know what I mean? Like, rather than potentially the biggest asset of our life, like we spend more time sorting out other things and sorting out potentially what our walkaway price is on a $1-2 million asset. It's crazy.
There's trained and there's untrained. Denzel Washington movie. Seen that with the little girl, the swimmer?
No.
That's a good movie.
Is it? So a big one at our company, we're really diligent on, I always call it sharpening the saw. You got to be sharp before you go out to cut. I won't take on a client unless we're nice and sharp, ready to go. So things like pre-approvals in place, knowing what team you've got behind you, building a pest inspectors ready, all those sorts of things. I always try to educate buyers that agents will sometimes suss you out to see how sharp you are before actually, if you're wanting to put offers in, the good agents are sussing you out to see how sharp you are. Would I be right in saying that? Like, do you have any tips for buyers in terms of being a sharp buyer?
100%. And I think that makes a difference between a good agent and a bad agent. Some agents just wanting to put deals together and they get excited, they get commission breath, they're thinking, oh wow, you put the deal, just bang it through, and then all of a sudden they're waiting 14 days for the finances to go through, and there's an extension for another 7 days, and it's 21, now the vendor's getting upset and what's going on, and next minute it falls over, and it's like, oh my God. But if you just spent the time at the beginning to ask your buyer as to where they're up to, have you been pre-qualified? And that doesn't mean walking into the bank and saying, how much money can I borrow? It's actually having the letter of approval and knowing that and asking those deeper questions of, have you got the letter? And they'll come back and say yes. And well, if you have the letter, then you only need a valuation. So you can do finance in 7 days. You don't need 14. You'll just get put in the 14-day pile and your offer will be stronger. So you're helping the buyer, like educating them as to what they need. Because the actual broker is going to say, yeah, try and get 14. That makes his job a little bit easier. But my job's not to make his job easier. My job's to help the vendor, and that's to get it down as quickly as possible for the most amount of money. And just recently I sold one where there was an offer $10,000 higher than a cash offer. And that cash offer still needed a bank valuation, but they were confident enough with what they'd seen that they were just going to go in there with a, when I say cash offer, no finance clause. So And I went to the vendor, had an offer at 920, subject to a 14-day finance clause, or 910, subject to nothing. And she said, well, what do you think? And I said, well, it's up to you. You know, these guys haven't been pre-qualified, so it may fall over because they might not be able to borrow the money. They've got no idea if they can or can't. They're just hoping. They've just gone in, done their own sums. And she said, oh, no, definitely not. I'm taking this one. So she had the choice, and she took it $10,000 because it was already above and beyond what her expectations were anyway. So she was a seller at 900. So at 910, it was bonus. 920, she didn't want to take the risk. So
good point.
Yeah, 100%.
I think that I think buyers. It's funny. I feel like when a buyer, when there's no buyer's agent involved, right? A buyer comes through a property, they like it, they fall in love with it, they want to buy it, and the buyers, they're like, become your best friend because they really want to buy the property, right? But then if it's subject to building and pest inspection, subject to finance, and subject to whatever, it's like all of a sudden, once the contract's signed and you've come to an agreement on the price, it's like they're not your best friend anymore. Now the broker's your best friend, and the solicitor, and the building and pest inspector. And what the agent's got to say becomes irrelevant. Do you know what I mean? It's almost like your job's done, stop. So I feel like quite often in the purchasing side of it, the buyers, it's sort of like they choose the path of least resistance. And by that, I mean the path of what's safest for me, subject to my finance clause, because my broker had suggested I need 21 days, subject to a 14-day building and pest inspection because that's what my solicitor suggested, subject to my cooling off period because if whatever happens and all that. And that's what I mean by the path of least resistance. But if you think about it from the seller's side, the path of least resistance for them is no finance clause, no cooling off period, maybe a 3-day building and pest inspection, you know. So it's imperative as agents, we dig deeper and we say, well, why do you need 21 days? Are you pre-approved? If you are, have you got that letter? Because if you do, it's subject to only evaluation. You don't need 3 weeks for the valuer to come out. The moment we give you the contract, I'll be expecting a call from the valuer within 24 hours. If that hasn't happened, we're already off track. You know, building a pest inspection. Well, you know, I think if the agents have done their due diligence, they might even have one already done to give to the buyers. So I think you got to respect both sides. But the one thing is, as a seller and as a buyer, you have to remember that the agent needs you as much as the vendor. Do you know what I mean? It's sometimes it can sound like, no, the agent just wants the commission. You know what I mean? Like, you're all friendly, you come to an agreement on price, and then everything that the agent recommends from that point on is like, oh, no, the agent just wants the commission. Or the broker or the solicitor might be saying the agent just wants the commission. It's not. The agent's trying to keep a deal together, and he needs you, the buyer, and the seller, and you've got to, with the meat in the sandwich, we've got to compromise. And quite often, qualifying the buyers in finance, building and pest, and all of that is crucial. Yeah. You know? And, you know, Andy, one of the first things that I learned from Andy was, when buyers get excited quickly, they pull out quickly. Oh my God, the amount of times it took me about 10 deals, and even during the deal where it's like first open house, buyer rushing, excited, all of that, and I fell into the trap every time. I just kept on going into here we go, first open, cracking price, done deal, and then it falls over. And it took me about 10 times the deal to fall over to realise, yeah, this is a real thing. You know, whereas someone who comes back for a second inspection, brings dad along, dad knocks on the wall, says, yep, it's all good, you know, then reviews the building and pest. Those little behaviours are triggers that we look for a qualified, genuine buyer. And when we present that contract to a vendor, even if it is 10 grand cheaper versus the other buyer who rushed in, threw it all on the line, that dialogue comes out to us, to our vendor. We say, look, this is what we've noticed with this buyer. My gut feeling with this one, they're coming in very quickly. They haven't done their homework and all that. They're rushing it. I think there's a chance they'll pull out as well. So,
yeah, it's always up to the vendor to make a decision at the end of the day what they want to do. But answering your question at the beginning, 100%, like getting your buyer qualified and being ready, because they're going to be up against competition at the moment. The market's hot, you know. So you're up, you know. I hear a lot of people saying, "Oh, I don't want to be in competition." I'm saying, well, you're buying in Palmy, you're going to be in competition. You know, like it's just something that's going to be happening. So you're better off to be as prepared as possible, so that when you're in competition, you've got your ducks lined up and you're in the mix. You're not putting yourself out of the mix because you haven't got your ducks lined up and you're needing a finance clause which is longer than the others. So, yeah, definitely very, very important.
Good answers.